A little girl, just 6 years old, walked up to her table and asked, "Ma'am, can I eat what's left?" She wore a worn-out dress, 2 sizes too small, and carried in her eyes a shine that was equal parts bravery and desperation. While the perfectly groomed waiters floated between tables holding crystal glasses, the girl, just 6, approached a well-dressed woman seated alone in front of a half-eaten plate. "Ma'am, can I eat what's left?" The words cut through the air like silent thunder. It wasn't just a request for food, it was a cry for humanity in a place where indifference seemed to be the main course. She didn't ask for money, or toys, or help. She asked for leftovers. And that moment sparked something no one in that room would ever forget. The contrast was brutal. On one side, crisp white tablecloths, dishes with unpronounceable names, and empty conversations about investments and vacations. On the other, a child who didn't even know when she'd eat again. That's often how the world divides, not between good and bad, but between those who notice and those who look away. The woman, startled and thrown off balance, looked around, hoping someone else would do something. But no one moved. Because it's easier to turn your head than to face your own comfort in the presence of someone else's pain. And it's in that kind of silence that stories are born. Stories that truly change the course of a life. She could have ignored it. Could have called the manager or done what everyone else did. Pretend not to hear. But something about that girl, maybe the brutal honesty in her request, lit a fire inside her that she couldn't explain. How could someone so small carry so much weight on her shoulders? She remembered herself as a little girl, crying over a toy she didn't get. That memory hurt. And it's in those moments, when reality slaps us with a hard truth, that the wheels of change begin to turn. But what the woman did next, no one was prepared to witness. Rebecca was not someone who broke easily. CEO of a multi-million-dollar company she built from scratch, she knew how to hold her ground, even under pressure. But in that moment, standing before that hungry little girl, something long dormant inside her cracked wide open. It was as if that simple plea had shattered every wall she'd built. Suddenly, the silverware lost its shine, the expensive wine lost its taste, and everything around her felt small. Because for the first time in a long time, she remembered what it meant to feel. The image of the girl triggered memories she barely wanted to revisit, a childhood of scarcity, hidden behind the mask of success. She remembered the day she begged a stranger for bread and was ignored. She remembered the promise she made to herself. No one would ever make her feel small again. But success had come at a price. Her sensitivity had been buried beneath deadlines, contracts, and meetings. And now, in the middle of a luxury restaurant, her executive armor was crumbling under the gaze of a child. This wasn't just about hunger. It was about absence. Absence of attention, of care, of listening. And Rebecca felt it like a punch to the stomach, not out of pity, but out of recognition. For the first time in years, she saw someone who also carried the weight of being unseen in their eyes. And that collision between two worlds, hers of abundance, and the girl's of need, lit something inside her that couldn't be undone. The woman who never cried suddenly felt her eyes brimming with tears. And as she reached for the child's small, dirty hand, she knew. Nothing in her life would ever be the same again. Rebecca held the girl's hand tighter than she realized. She was still processing it all, the weight of the moment, when she whispered, "What's your name, sweetheart?" The answer came quickly, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Luna. Luna Martinez. Time stopped for a second. Martinez. That name wasn't just familiar. It was a piece of a story Rebecca had left behind. The last name of her best friend, a woman she hadn't seen in years, but who had marked her life forever. In college, Rebecca and Carla were inseparable. They dreamed big, shared secrets, plans, and even the kinds of pain no one else knew about. Then life, with its rush and unexpected turns, pulled them apart. Rebecca pursued her career. Carla vanished. And now, in what felt like a script too surreal to be real, Carla's daughter was standing in front of her, asking for leftovers in a luxury restaurant. The shock wasn't just emotional, it was existential. It felt like the past had returned to demand resolution. Rebecca's mind began to race, flooded with unspoken questions. What happened to Carla? How did Luna end up on the streets? Why didn't anyone step in? This encounter, even if indirect, brought back emotions she didn't even know how to name anymore. Guilt. Forgotten promises. Fragments of a friendship that still lived somewhere in her heart. But even as her thoughts swirled, she knew she couldn't ignore the sign that had just appeared in front of her. Because some encounters aren't coincidences, they're disguised callings. And she had no idea what was still to come. Carla's voice echoed in her mind, distant and soft, from a random afternoon long ago. If I'm ever not around, promise me you'll look after my daughter? Back then, Rebecca thought it was overly dramatic. But she promised. And now, staring at the raw and unexpected truth, she felt the weight of what she had let slip away. It wasn't just a broken promise, it was an entire life lost between intention and action. Luna should have been with her. Protected. Loved. But instead, she was here, asking for scraps, invisible to a world that pretends not to see. Carla had died years ago, in a vague accident Rebecca only found out about online, too late to do anything. She never knew about Luna. No one told her. And while Rebecca was climbing the ladder of success, Luna had fallen into the cold maze of the system, left in the wrong hands, with the wrong man. Eduardo Martinez. A man Carla always feared, whose features Rebecca now saw mirrored in Luna's eyes. That same frightened, guarded look of someone who's seen too much and trusted too little. Knowing Luna had gone through that, defenseless, was a pain almost too deep to describe. And the cruelest part. Rebecca only learned the truth now, through this impossible meeting. A lifetime of resources, connections, and possibilities. None of it had prevented this girl from falling into the hands of an abuser. It was as if the universe was staring her in the face, saying, "You had everything you needed to keep your promise, and you forgot." The promise wasn't just to Carla. It was to destiny. And destiny always collects. Now, the question wasn't about the past anymore. It was about what she would do with this second chance, if she still had time to rewrite this story. Luna's voice was soft, almost emotionless, like someone who had already learned to swallow her tears to avoid bothering anyone. She spoke of her life as if she were talking about the weather. "I had to clean the other kids' bathrooms every day. They said it was my punishment for crying at night." Rebecca could barely contain her rage. But the girl didn't speak with anger, only resignation. As if she had learned too early that pain was simply part of the deal. 3 years. 3 whole years in which her childhood had been stripped from her. Not in a single moment, but through a constant routine of violence disguised as care. Luna had passed through foster homes that felt more like prisons. In one of them, she had to take care of the younger kids and clean the house while the adults watched TV. Psychologists labeled her as difficult, strange, unable to behave properly, when in truth, all she wanted was to exist without being punished for it. Hugs were rare. Shouting was daily. In one institution, she said her punishment for talking back was to stand for hours, staring at a wall. She was 7 years old. And at 7, she ran away. She stuffed a pack of cookies into one pocket, a hairbrush in the other, and disappeared into the world. Rebecca listened to all of this with a storm of guilt and disbelief. How had the system allowed it? How had she, with all her power and resources, not realized that her best friend's daughter was being crushed by neglect? Every word Luna spoke was like a mirror, not just reflecting the failure of a social structure, but the emptiness inside someone who was supposed to protect. The girl didn't want pity. She wanted peace. A place to sleep without fear. And deep down, Rebecca knew, this story was only just beginning. Luna reached into the pocket of her worn-out dress and pulled out a small object wrapped in a faded cloth. She carefully unwrapped it to reveal an old music box, its gold details worn by time. "My mom gave me this," she whispered. When she lifted the lid, a soft melody filled the silence of the room, and Rebecca's heart skipped a beat. That melody. She knew it. It was the same one Carla used to play when they dreamed about the future. That little music box now pulsed like a keepsake, bringing back everything that had been forgotten, especially the things that needed to be remembered. The box wasn't just a gift. It was an emotional lifeline, a symbol of the unbreakable bond between mother and daughter. Carla had left a message in it, unspoken but powerful, a reminder for Luna to never forget who she was. And ironically, it was a message for Rebecca too. That promises made in love don't die with time. They simply sleep, waiting to be awakened. As Rebecca watched Luna wind the delicate key, she saw how tightly the child clung to the one thing that reminded her she had once been truly loved. For Rebecca, this was more than a reunion with the past. It was a call to reconnect with the version of herself that existed before the world hardened her heart. The music box, though fragile, had survived everything, just like Luna. Just like Carla. Just like the memories that hold on even when everything else falls apart. And in that sweet, melancholic sound was a truth too powerful to ignore. Carla's love hadn't died. It had simply been waiting to be welcomed back. And Luna was the thread that still tied all those stories together. Rebecca stared at Luna, searching for the right moment to reveal a truth that hurt even her to say. You need to know who your father is, and why he should have never raised you. Her voice was shaky, but firm. Eduardo Martinez wasn't just a name, he was an open wound. Rebecca remembered the bruises on Carla's arms, the silent tears, the apologies that repeated like a cursed script. After the third report, Carla had finally kicked him out. She swore Luna would never grow up in that man's shadow. What Rebecca never imagined was that, after Carla's death, Eduardo would reappear, with forged documents, smooth lies, and a manipulative charm that even fooled the state. He hid the will, the final wish of a mother who trusted her daughter to her best friend. Rebecca was Luna's legal guardian, but she never got a call, never received any notice. Because Eduardo made sure the truth disappeared, exploiting a loophole in the system to claim what was never his. The betrayal wasn't just against Carla, it was against Luna. Knowing it all could have been avoided was eating Rebecca alive. The anger was overwhelming, but so was something else. Responsibility. Not legal. Emotional. Moral. For Carla, for Luna, for everything that had been lost because of a forced silence. Now, Rebecca knew what had to be done. And she understood that to fix this injustice, it wouldn't be enough to just shelter Luna. She would have to face old ghosts, dangerous people, and most of all, the very system that allowed all of this to happen. But first, Luna needed to hear something that would change how she saw her entire story. Rebecca couldn't sleep the night she uncovered the full extent of Eduardo's cruelty. Hiding the will and lying to social services wasn't enough for him. He went further. He stole what rightfully belonged to Luna, an inheritance left by Carla, years of hard work, sacrifices, and quiet struggle. Over $200,000, stolen through forged signatures, ghost accounts, and cold precision. It was as if the man had made a career out of erasing everything Carla built with pain and love. Determined to see it through, Rebecca hired a team of private investigators and legal experts. She didn't just want evidence, she wanted justice. And it didn't take long to uncover documents proving Carla's signature had been forged, bank statements with suspicious transactions, and contact logs showing Eduardo's connection to corrupt notary employees. Rebecca had faced ruthless corporate opponents before, but nothing came close to the filth now rising to the surface. It felt like digging through mud with bare hands, but she knew she couldn't stop. With every discovery, Rebecca felt a mix of rage and relief. Rage for everything Luna had been forced to endure. Relief for finally having the tools to change the outcome. But this wasn't just about returning stolen money, it was about giving Luna back her identity, her dignity, her place in the world. Luna didn't know all the details yet. Rebecca would tell her when the time was right. But as she prepared to file the lawsuit, she knew the truth was about to come out. And once it did, nothing would ever be the same. The doorbell rang over and over, at an hour that made no sense. Rebecca, her eyes still puffy from a sleepless night, looked through the intercom screen and froze. Eduardo Martinez, standing at the building's entrance. Crumpled suit, tense face, bloodshot eyes. He was demanding to see Luna. Claimed he was the legal father, that he had rights. In that moment, Rebecca knew the real confrontation had begun. There was no more time for slow strategies. It was now. And she had to protect Luna at all costs. She quickly moved Luna away from the hallway, locked the inner door, and called her lawyer. "He's here. Right now. At the entrance." The response came immediately. "Don't let him in. I'm calling the authorities." Rebecca's heart was pounding so loudly she could barely think. Eduardo was too confident, like someone hiding dangerous cards. That made her even more alert. Because the kind of man who manipulates the law and steals a child is the kind who doesn't back down easily. While Luna, not fully understanding what was happening, held the music box like a sacred charm, Rebecca stood between her and the door like a shield. Eduardo would not take that child again. Not while she was alive. The doorman had already been instructed to block him, and the police were on their way. But Rebecca knew this was just the beginning. Eduardo wouldn't give up easily. And behind his threat, there was something darker, something Rebecca didn't know yet, but that would soon come to light with devastating force. As Rebecca reviewed strategies with her attorney and kept Luna safe, the girl sat quietly on the couch, music box in her hands, and whispered something that seemed simple, almost innocent. "Mom said if anything happened, I should look in the place of secrets." Rebecca froze. That phrase. That code. Only one person in the world would know what it meant besides Carla, and that was her. The place of secrets was a secret hiding spot from their college days, where they stashed love letters, journals, even emergency money. And if Carla really used that place? Rebecca felt a rush of adrenaline mixed with hope. Carla had always been too smart to leave everything to chance. If she had hidden documents, perhaps there was still undeniable proof of Luna's guardianship, the real will, and maybe even evidence of the corruption Eduardo had used to manipulate the system. The memory of that hiding place, a metal box behind the bookcase in the old student house where they once lived, made Rebecca's heart race. The key to turning everything around might be exactly where it all began. In the past they shared. Wasting no time, she called the current owner of the house and explained that she desperately needed to retrieve something she had left behind decades ago. The man, surprised, agreed to let her visit. Rebecca knew she couldn't go alone. She took Luna with her. Because this wasn't just a search for documents, it was a rescue mission. A reclaiming of truth, history, and legacy. And as she drove in silence, a strange calm settled over her. Maybe, just maybe, everything was finally about to make sense. In the quiet office, Luna looked at the lawyer with curious eyes far too weary for her age. He knelt down, spoke gently, and told her the truth. "You were the victim of crimes, Luna. Your father lied, stole, and took from you everything your mother tried to protect." Rebecca stood beside her, holding her hand tightly. The conversation wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Luna needed to know that what she had been through wasn't her fault, and that, at last, someone was ready to fight for her. The lawyer laid out what would happen next. Protective measures, a legal process for permanent guardianship, and the opening of criminal investigations into forgery, fraud, and psychological abuse. The legal world was complex, but to Rebecca, it all boiled down to one word: reparation. She had once negotiated billion-dollar deals, defeated titans in the corporate world, but nothing had prepared her for this. Because this time, it wasn't about power or prestige. It was about love. It was about justice. It was about a promise to a friend, a promise she had vowed to keep until the end. And as she looked into Luna's now stronger, more steady eyes, Rebecca knew the fight was only just beginning. Because the system is slow. Because Eduardo still had allies. Because trauma doesn't disappear with a signed piece of paper. But she also knew she had something stronger on her side. Truth, evidence, and a bond that time and distance hadn't broken. And in that moment, as Luna leaned against her shoulder in silence, Rebecca felt it. No matter how long it takes, she won't stop until justice is done. The news hit like ice water. Eduardo had disappeared and kidnapped Luna after school. The police confirmed he had crossed the border with fake documents and was likely hiding in a neighboring country or protected by accomplices. The task force set up to find him ran into legal and bureaucratic obstacles that slowed everything down. Rebecca paced back and forth in her living room, unable to accept the idea of waiting while the man who had destroyed Luna's life remained free. It was like watching justice suffocate under its own weight. She heard what the lawyers said. Trust the police. Don't take matters into your own hands. But Rebecca had already trusted the system too much, and that's exactly why Luna had gone through everything she had. There was no time for patience. Not when a child's safety was at stake. Not when a promise was on the line. That's when she picked up the phone and called someone she hadn't spoken to in years, an old contact from her company's days in international security. Someone who knew how to find ghosts. Rebecca knew she needed someone who didn't play by the rules. Days later, a private investigator was already following the trail Eduardo had left behind. He had changed his appearance, switched phones, but no one disappears completely. Despite the fear, Rebecca felt closer than ever to putting an end to the chase. Because when it came to protecting what truly mattered, she had no limits. Now, the hunt for Eduardo wasn't just legal. It was personal. And Rebecca was prepared to go all the way, even if it meant crossing borders to do so. Help came when Rebecca least expected it, and from places she never imagined. Marina Silva, a veteran social worker who had handled dozens of cases like Luna's, heard about the situation through an anonymous tip and sprang into action. She knew the ins and outs of the child protection system better than anyone, and understood that without social pressure and strategic coordination, the case might quietly disappear. Marina didn't just take the case, she embraced it as a personal mission. And soon, she brought with her a network of allies powerful enough to shift the tide. Thomas, a former client from Rebecca's private consulting days, reappeared as well. He owed her more than money, he owed her his company. Years ago, she had saved his business. When he heard about Luna's case, he offered the services of his private security team and a group of international legal experts. Rebecca, used to fighting her battles alone, now found herself surrounded by people who, without obligation, were ready to fight for Luna. It was as if all the good she had put into the world was finally returning when she needed it most. But the most surprising twist came from where no one expected, a former employee of Eduardo. A quiet man, fearful, but carrying an envelope filled with documents, recordings, and hidden financial records. He had worked with Eduardo for years but, after witnessing so much corruption, decided to leave, and took the evidence with him. Among the files was an audio confession of Eduardo admitting to forging the will and stealing the inheritance. Rebecca could barely believe it. It was as if all the pieces were finally starting to fall into place. While Rebecca moved mountains to find Eduardo, Luna was far away, locked in a stifling room without windows, in a place she couldn't identify. The story now split between Rebecca's relentless pursuit and Luna's dark days in captivity. But Luna was not just a victim, she was a keen observer, noticing every small detail. The smell of bread coming from a side door, the sound of a gate locking at exactly 8 o'clock, the logo on one of the guards' uniforms. She stored each piece of information with surgical precision. And she began to plan. With a broken colored pencil and old paper she found in a drawer, Luna began to draw what looked like innocent pictures, but they were more than that. Hidden in the sketches were clues, a swapped letter hinting at a street name, a flower with petals forming a number. She taped the drawings to the corners of the room, pretending they were childish distractions, hoping that someday someone would notice. That's when Camila appeared, a woman with a hard expression, in charge of bringing meals and guarding the doors. She seemed numb to emotion, until one day, she heard Luna softly singing the melody from the music box, and cried in silence. Camila was more than she appeared. Her past was filled with pain and loss. And seeing Luna, small, defiant, and clinging to hope, stirred something inside her that she thought had died. Slowly, she started to talk to the girl, to listen to her whispers, to study the drawings. And in one of those drawings, she understood the message. Luna was asking for help, quietly, like someone casting a bottle into the sea. Camila hesitated. Helping would mean betraying Eduardo. But something inside her screamed louder. She knew that if she did nothing, she would never forgive herself. And so, she began to act. The call came at 2 a.m. We found Eduardo. Rebecca didn't hesitate for a second. She grabbed the folder with the documents, alerted her legal team, and boarded the first flight out. Eduardo was in a coastal town, trying to flee with Luna using fake identification. His movements had been tracked thanks to an improvised GPS tracker hidden inside Luna's backpack, placed there by Camila, the woman who had risked everything to save her. The escape plan was underway, but Rebecca arrived at the exact moment. It was as if destiny itself had been holding the threads of a story that needed to end. Right there, right then. When Eduardo saw her, he tried to back away. He shouted orders, pushed agents, caused a scene. But this time, there was nowhere left to run. The task force, made up of international authorities and human rights officials, had already sealed off the perimeter. Luna was pulled from his arms by a humanitarian officer just as Rebecca approached, shocked, but steady. She didn't say a word. She just looked into the eyes of the man who had destroyed so many lives through manipulation. And in that gaze, there was something more powerful than hatred, the strength of someone who survived in order to protect, and who was finally able to seek justice. The case quickly gained international attention. The Human Rights Court stepped in due to the severity of the violations: abduction, international fraud, child abuse, identity forgery. The hearing was broadcast across global media, and Luna's name, kept private until then, became a symbol of the fight for children lost in the cracks of the system. Rebecca, alongside Marina, Thomas, and Camila, stood firm through the entire trial. When the sentence was read aloud, condemning Eduardo without any right to appeal, the courtroom filled with a heavy silence, broken only by the sound of Luna's relieved breath. But that wasn't the end. The sun was rising when Luna walked through the embassy doors, barefoot, her backpack still on her shoulders. For the first time in what felt like forever, she could breathe without fear. Rebecca was waiting outside, eyes wet with tears, kneeling with her arms wide open. No words were needed. Luna ran straight into that embrace that felt like it was stitching back together everything the world had tried to tear apart. There, in the middle of the street, surrounded by journalists, officers, and activists, two souls that life had separated were finally in the right place, one in the arms of the other. And the justice they had fought for wasn't just legal, it was emotional. Eduardo was taken away in handcuffs, but, predictably, tried one last desperate move. He claimed insanity, said Carla had manipulated him, tried to twist the story in the final minutes. But the judges already had everything they needed: evidence, testimonies, psychological reports. His final stunt only sealed his fate as a heartless manipulator. The verdict was clear: the maximum prison sentence, with no chance of appeal. And with that, the cycle of abuse that began with Carla had finally come to an end. Luna would never have to look over her shoulder again. But their story didn't end like the movies where everything becomes perfect again. Rebecca lost everything. She sold the company, mortgaged her assets, and poured every last cent into securing justice. Her public image was shredded by biased media. She was called insane for going against powerful systems, and she fought silent battles that nearly broke her. But she gained something no money in the world could ever buy: peace. And more than that, she gained a daughter, not by blood, but by choice, by soul, and by a promise kept. And as Luna slept peacefully beside her, for the first time in years, Rebecca also closed her eyes in peace. In the police van, as the city slowly woke outside, Rebecca held Luna like her arms were fortress walls. The girl trembled, even without feeling cold. Her eyes were open, but trapped in memories Rebecca could never erase. "You're safe now. No one will ever hurt you again. I promise." Those were the only words she could manage. And for the first time, Luna silently nodded, resting her head against Rebecca's chest, as if choosing to believe in something she had never truly known. There was no luxury in that car, only surrender. But rescuing Luna brought more than relief, it brought exposure. National and international media invaded Rebecca's privacy, hungry to turn pain into headlines. Reporters knocked at her door, twisted the facts, and social media boiled with judgment. Rebecca, once a respected corporate figure, was now being labeled the unhinged millionaire by some, and the faceless heroine by others. Tired of the circus, she made a radical decision. She sold her luxury apartment, left the spotlight behind, and moved with Luna to a modest home in the countryside, where the only things that mattered were silence and rebuilding. Even in peace, trauma didn't disappear with a judge's signature. The nights were still haunted by nightmares. Sometimes Luna would wake up screaming, convinced she was being taken again. And Rebecca, with all the patience in the world, would sit on the edge of the bed, wrap her arms around her daughter, and quietly hum the melody of the old music box. It was the only sound that could soothe her. Healing came slowly, in drawings on the fridge, in soft laughter, in barefoot steps across the backyard. Rebecca knew the scars would remain, but she also knew that with enough love, even the deepest wounds can learn not to hurt anymore. What was left of the old Rebecca fit into a few cardboard boxes and memories she chose not to carry. No fortune, no status, no luxury, but a kind of peace she'd never known before. She started over from scratch, with a second-hand desk, a used laptop, and one clear idea: a consulting firm focused on businesses with social impact. She wanted to help other women avoid the systems that had failed her. And this time, she wasn't alone. Luna, her eyes brighter now, colored the flyers by hand and told everyone, "This business is to help sad people become strong again." One warm afternoon, while planting flowers in their new garden, Luna asked a question that sliced through the air like a blade. "Do you regret choosing me?" Rebecca froze, removed her dirt-stained gloves, and knelt down to look her in the eyes. "Luna, if I had to lose everything again, it would hurt, yes. But I would do it all exactly the same. Because the moment I chose you, it felt like the world finally made sense." Luna didn't reply, but her eyes shimmered. And in that moment, the past lost its grip. They weren't victims of what happened anymore. They were survivors of what they had endured, together. A few days later, the sentence became official. Eduardo Martinez, sentenced to 15 years in prison, no right to appeal, and permanently stripped of any legal rights over Luna. His name was erased from all legal records, as if he had never existed. And for the first time, Luna was allowed to choose her last name. She chose to keep Martinez, but now, alongside a new one, Rebecca. The new birth certificate arrived on a rainy morning. Just a piece of paper, but it meant everything. Luna was no longer a lost girl in a broken system. She was a daughter, by law, by love, and by a promise fulfilled. The next chapter arrived in the form of an invitation. The city needed someone with courage, experience, and heart to lead a new child protection program. Rebecca read and reread the official letter, the weight of the offer slowly sinking in. After everything they'd been through, she hadn't planned to return to the front lines, but something in that mission rekindled an old flame. When she showed Luna the proposal, she expected hesitation, but all she heard was, "If we can help more kids, I really want you to say yes." The same little girl who once begged for food between tables of luxury now wanted to serve as a bridge for other lives. And so, the simple house where they rebuilt their lives transformed. Walls were painted in soft colors, bedrooms were adapted with extra beds, toys appeared little by little, donated by neighbors and old partners of Rebecca. The place had become an informal shelter, but a living one, filled with laughter, late-night cries, and new stories being written every single day. Rebecca handled the paperwork, sure, but it was Luna who tended to the invisible wounds. One day, she found a little girl curled up in the corner of a room, frightened, silent. Luna said nothing. She simply sat beside her and opened the music box. The melody, fragile and sweet, filled the silence with something no words could ever express. The girl looked, then cried, and for the first time, rested her head on someone's shoulder. It was like watching a cycle break, and a new one begin. A cycle of healing. Over time, more children arrived. Some stayed only days. Others, months. But all of them, without exception, left with something stronger than protection. Hope. And the house of Rebecca and Luna, the one that was born out of pain, became a symbol of transformation. A living proof that, even when everything is taken from us, we can still choose to begin again, and turn trauma into mission. Years had passed since that afternoon when Luna was rescued from the arms of fear. Now, at 17, she walked beside Rebecca with steady steps. No longer the scared little girl who once arrived at that doorstep, but a strong young woman, eyes bright with purpose. The old shelter, once a scarred and humble home, had become a beacon in the city. Its impact was impossible to ignore. It was Thomas Crawford, the former client turned friend and admirer of Rebecca's journey, who brought the proposal to fund the construction of a full-fledged care center, complete with psychologists, educators, dormitories, an art space, and even a small garden. Rebecca hesitated at first. She was afraid that growing too much might dilute the soul of the project. But it was Luna who took her hand and said firmly, "We're only afraid to grow when we forget where we came from. But if our heart stays in the right place, more kids will get to feel what I felt with you." And that's how the Carla Martinez Center was born. A gentle, profound tribute to Luna's biological mother. Not for everything she was, but for what she could have been. And for the invisible strength that, somehow, led Luna to Rebecca. The inauguration ceremony was deeply emotional. Children running. Families embraced. Voices intertwined with hope. And Luna, standing on stage, microphone trembling in her hand, shared her story with hundreds of teenagers. Her words weren't rehearsed. They were lived. At the end of the day, sitting together on a bench in the garden of the new center, Rebecca looked at Luna, eyes shimmering. "Do you remember the first thing you ever asked me?" she whispered. Luna smiled. "Miss, can I eat what's left over?" They both laughed, moved beyond words. That simple question had become the turning point of an entire life. A single act of love that changed everything. Family isn't blood. It's decision. It's presence. It's a daily choice. And love. Love only grows when we choose to share it.